a building. It was owned by Kaiser Permanente, right? It attached right in the hospital. So when you're scouting out a building, you want to make sure who's the owner, and make sure it fits with your general message. And you're going to be kicked out in no time. Just know that. And a lot of times it's harder for them to look up the owner on Sunday, usually in San Francisco, because they have to go through certain channels. And usually they just say fuck it, whatever, and wait till Monday. What do we do?
Okay, so when you're choosing a building, right, so if the purpose of the occupation is to draw attention to a certain issue, like often homelessness, then, yeah, as Davey said, you want to make sure that you know who owns the building, and you want to make sure that you choose a building that is sort of relevant to those issues. So, you know, for instance, a huge abandoned single-room occupancy complex, you know, that like could be providing low-income housing or free housing for the homeless. So you want to make sure you choose your target building based on the issues that you're trying to raise. Or yeah, if you're like basically trying to protest the activities of a company or a group that owns a property, that's another. Yeah, make sure you make clear who owns it in the occupation. So, okay, logistically, how you would want to maybe organize said public housing occupation. A lot of the time what you want to do is you want to have a march that meets somewhere else, and you don't publicly disclose the location of the building until the march gets there. And you'll have a lot of the time people who are already in the building when the march gets there, who can open the building to the public and drop banners and help bring in food for the occupiers, things like that. So a lot of time you'll have like banner making parties beforehand, and you'll make sure you have all the food organized so that people can be like comfortable and so the message is getting out. So then generally kind of you have like, and then the night before you want to have a group of people, like maybe 5, 6 people, depending on the size of the building, to essentially go into the building, spend the night there, spend the night. Huh? Oh. Yeah, pigs go home. That's you. You want to have people in there beforehand, just getting everything ready. You want them to, like, a lot of the time maybe drop banners when everything gets there. I don't know, I'm repeating myself.
Generally, you should want to be prepared in case the fucking pigs come in no time and shut you down. So it's always smart, like, to bring some food in and supplies you need. And a lot of times, like, the pigs have locked up the place with people inside of it. So we've used buckets to drop down and bring up food, and then the cops, yeah, they cut the rope, so it's always good to have more than enough things like that to where you can still get supplies in and have them in beforehand, just in case it gets shut down in no time. They lock people in. And how many people are preoccupying all depends on, you know, the size of the space, what people, you know, agree beforehand. It should be pretty, fluid once it's done.
Right, so once the march gets there, the people who preoccupied, a lot of the time they don't even have to stay, but you want to make sure that you have, like, people who agree to occupy and risk arrest. Which brings me to the next thing. A lot of the time, these occupations end in the group of people who agreed to occupy the building basically taking a voluntary arrest, which usually, at least in my experience in San Francisco, usually just ends in you get cited and released. They issue you a ticket for a court appearance, and then everyone goes to the arraignment and everything gets dropped. But that's mostly in San Francisco. I feel like this tactic hasn't been used as much in Oakland, and I don't have personal experience with when it has. There have also been times when, if you can find like good escape routes, everyone stayed in the building until the last minute, and then and like made the cops and made everybody think that they were still in there. And then it's like barricaded like the whole building, and then like escaped. And that was basically the cops were just in there for like hours and hours, opening every room and like looking for people that weren't there. Yeah. So that really is also something that you want to talk about when you're organizing an action like this, because you don't want to have to spend like 5 hours in a building, like having meetings, trying to decide, and then not being sure of your exit plan, which has happened before also. So I think what? I think that's pretty much like what we have. I don't know if anybody has questions. We can take some. Yeah. Usually, in my experience, it's usually been done with housing, but it has also been done, I mean, usually it's abandoned buildings, abandoned houses, abandoned, like, apartment complexes, but it has also been done in like sit-in form, right? Like with like we did one at the Social Security office, and you can do it at banks, stuff like that. But that's kind of very different, like, strategically.
Yeah, what we're not talking about is for housing at all. It's just for political for protest purposes, I guess. We're talking about short-term occupations we've done abandoned schools before, abandoned homes and everything. Just.
We're less knowledgeable about that. Actually, the person you might want to ask about that is Brian. Just saying, like, if you want to occupy like a bank or like
like if you're talking about like occupying it while people are in there, kind of like a sit-in. Homes at Jails usually doesn't do stuff like that. I mean, I have before. It's a vastly different tactic, but yeah, it's not really what we're talking about right here. We're talking about like, taking unoccupied spaces. I think that would be for a different time, because it's totally different. So, what? If it's closed down and not being used, that's more what we're talking about. Then you would just, the same way you do reconnaissance on a squat, and then open it up. It's the same thing, except for keep it covert until you have all your banners and food in there, and you have like a march going to it or something like that.
Absolutely. So one of the things that one of the things that it's really important to do, and thank you for bringing that up, is you want to make it really, really clear, like, what the risks are to everybody before, people occupy or agree to occupy the building. What we've done also in the past is made sure that the National Lawyers Guild has arrest intake forms. So basically everybody who's agreeing to occupy writes down all their information, and all those pieces of paper go to the NLG, so that no one's kind of getting lost in the chaos of the cops arresting everybody. The other thing is like Yeah. I don't know, what do you... Yeah, you just have to, I mean, ultimately you have to like make sure to fully explain all the risks to everybody and then sort of allow people to make decisions for themselves what kind of risk they want to take, and also just make sure that you know, people are on the outside keeping tabs on you and people are there supporting those getting arrested, things like that. People also have strategies for when the cops do come in. You know, everyone like sits together, you know, on the ground in the least like defensive or offensive. Like you want to be completely passive so they don't have an excuse to do anything. That's what people have done in the past.
Usually there's always a certain point when you know the cops are coming in for real. Like where everyone should be, who doesn't want to get arrested, should be out before that point. So, and
you have escape routes planned for those people.
Yeah, usually you should try to have, you know, more covert exits. It hasn't happened all the time, but if you can get them, you would want to have something like that. And everyone who doesn't want to get arrested shouldn't be in the building when that time comes. If you're getting a voluntary arrest type thing. If not, like if you're planning on barricading and leaving and not doing voluntary arrest, then that all depends, you know, on if the person wants to stay or not and risk it.
Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Media outreach.
Yeah.
Media outreach.
I always hate doing media outreach, so hopefully you have a person with a good contact list. Before you do an action, just, you know, talk to everyone you know. Try to get someone who's, you know, done media before and is good at media. Yeah, that's what I never do.
Yeah, so you want to, okay. So my understanding, which is limited about media outreach, is a lot of the time you want to call newspapers, news agencies, you know, TV news channels, whatever, and tell them there's gonna be this kind of action, like maybe the day before, and maybe tell them like where the march is gonna start, so that you're not like disclosing the actual location of the building you're gonna occupy. And then once people are in there, you might want to have people on the outside like calling and telling the news while it's happening. You know, hey, come to this building. Look, there's these crazy people in there doing stuff. You know.
Try to have flyers, Facebook page. I mean, generally the same stuff you would do for just a regular march. And someone with a good contact list always helps. I'm thinking of someone specifically, but anyway.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add on to that, like when you are going to get yourself voluntarily arrested, make sure somebody you trust, so my nickname has your mailed contact.
Yeah. A lot of the time you want to let the NLG know before, like a week before or something, like a good amount of time before, so they have time to prepare and they know that this is going to happen. And then give them everyone's information who's in there, real names, all that stuff, so that they'll just kind of know what's up with that.
Narcs involved.
Don't fucking snitch, please.
Yeah, I think in all the stuff in the homes at jails I've done, we really haven't had a problem with people trying to fuck shit up. Like, it happens a lot around here at protests and more open events and stuff, but I think because the way it's organized, where you do it with, you know, a collective, you know, a group of people you know somewhat, at least the occupation part, it usually helps to not have people infiltrating and trying to fuck it up. But
it usually helps.
Yeah, I can only think of one occupation where there was a guy in there that was really doing stupid stuff, but we all had to handle them. But no, I mean, this is usually at most it's a fucking trespassing charge, which isn't much. I mean, they don't go out of their way to, like, you know, most of the time you're gonna get arrested anyway, so it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, a lot of the time the government kind of doesn't give enough of a fuck to try to infiltrate this kind of actions because they're pretty low key a lot of the time. Although that might change if they become more prevalent and more like popularized, which would be cool. But yeah, I mean, if people are getting arrested anyway, the only thing that you would worry about is disclosing the location of the building, because you don't want them to be prepared for you to like go in and be able to stop it before it can even happen. So that's the one thing that you're usually like trying to keep under wraps more than anything else. You want to keep that like pretty private until, so like, you know, people who are going to be leading the march and like people who are going to be opening and preoccupying the building like before the march gets there. Those are like, you want to keep the people who know in that, to that like general circle a lot of the time. One more question and then we have to move on to Brian's part. Anybody? You. That would be fucking awesome. In my experience, what? Oh, the question was, would you want to find a house that you know you're going to get kicked out of immediately? Or would you want to try to find a place that you could maybe try to stay in for like a week or longer? In my experience, when you go to a building with like a big march and like you have all this press and all this stuff going on, they usually try to make a point of evicting you as fast as possible just because it's so public. Although I have to say that, and often that's kind of the purpose, like you don't want to take up a building and draw attention to a building that somebody might actually be able to live in, you know, like to be able to squat in. But, you know, it hasn't yet been tried having somebody like get mail there and like get squatters' rights on the building beforehand, because that would be crazy. I don't know. Because it just hasn't been tried, because it's like, usually in these actions, you know, you're going there to like take a symbolic stance of occupying this building and then everyone get kicked out and it shows what assholes the cops are and all that kind of thing. Yeah, especially if it's city-owned. If it's city-owned, you're kind of fucked for that anyway. But okay, I'm going to hand this off to Brian.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's Homes Not Jails, and they did their, you know, general political strategy for taking over public buildings. Now we're going to have people come from the university occupations and kind of talk about their political strategies and what their experiences are with university occupations.
Hey everybody. So we were participants in the university struggle that happened 2 years ago in 2009 to 2010. It happened in the UCs as well as the CSUs. So the sites of struggle back then were UC Santa Cruz, SF State, and UC Berkeley. In addition, there was stuff at CSU Stanislaus and UC Davis. Sorry, UC Irvine, UCLA, CSU Fullerton. And so during that time, there was a whole series of building occupations, as well as sit-ins and other blockades. But I think in sort of opposition to sort of Homes Not Jails approach, one of the main aspects of the university occupations was that, in fact, these occupations were not symbolic. The idea was say, for example, the university wasn't providing us adequate services, so we needed to take space for our struggles in order to experiment with new forms of life and to create and have the movement have a sort of a place to express itself. So, what?
I don't know what else to say. We have these little things that were made, the after the fall communiques, and there's a lot of writing about some things that happened. I just want to say, like, it feels like the university stuff is starting up again with what happened at Cal and what happened at Davis, but none of that is really new. Like, they've been beating up students for the past like 3 years, so, and before that. But now that it's being tied to the Occupy movement, I think it's getting a little more traction and more national press and things like that. But also, it's not, I think it's like, even though it's happening in the universities, like, it's more than just like a university struggle. Like, I think everyone there and is aware of larger struggles happening, and also like it involves more than just students. It's also university workers and people in the community around the university who are involved. Anything else you guys want to say?
Yeah, so I mean, to touch more on what Brian was saying, I think the tactic of occupation, like there's some specific tactical parameters which operate, I think, in a university that make the way you seize buildings and the way you hold on to them, the chances you have of holding them onto them for a good amount of time, really particular to the university. But the strategy which was employed is actually something which doesn't it's not necessarily particular to the university struggle whatsoever. So it's something, I mean, really the history of it comes from the workers' movement over 100 years ago, of like seizing factory buildings during struggles over working conditions. The strategic objective. Yeah, the strategic objective is not symbolic protest, like be able to hang banners and get media coverage. Like, the objective of occupation, as it was employed in the university movement, is really to seize space for people to come together and talk about struggles at the site of the site where the struggle is taking place. Like, the difference between that and the occupation movement now, where people are camping out in, I don't know, public places around the city, is you have people from all different kind of struggles coming together here to kind of find a common meeting place where they can talk about common problems, common ways to move forward that affect a lot of different struggles. But at the university, and also in factory occupations, workplace occupations throughout history, the objective is really to seize a space at the site of struggle and give people a place to come together, organize, fight, meet each other, meet their needs, live, I don't know, within the struggle. And also, when you do have a barricade situation where the occupation's closed because the police presence prevents people from moving within and without, inside and outside of the building, you have a large kind of conglomeration of people who gather outside of the occupation, who might not have any idea what's going on until they see it and come by. And like, this is actually really where most of what happens that makes these actions important, is that you have like you have tons of, at least in this example, you have tons of students who come together who might have never had any experience like this before, just kind of walk up like, what's going on here? What's going on? Why are these people locked themselves inside a building? And like, it gives an opportunity for people to have conversations, very similar to what we had at the plaza here, where like why are these people doing it? What's going on? And that's really like where these movements build and kind of grow exponentially from. So yeah, I think the key point we want to communicate is that really this is like, it's not about getting media coverage. It's not about creating a spectacle and hanging banners. Like, those are small parts of it, but the objective is really to create spaces where people can organize, meet new people, and talk about these struggles. Claire's gonna pass out some literature left from 2009. So if you guys haven't read this, there's some interesting things and stuff.
just a quick overview about what happened at UC Santa Cruz. There was a number of occupations, lockdown occupations, in which students and community members seized buildings by force and locked them down and precluded the cops from entering them. And that was a big part of the strategy too, was removing the police from the situation, because you couldn't occupy a building and control it in the way that you need if the cops were allowed into it. It's because the cops are sort of the enforcement hand of the administration or of the society in general, and by allowing the police into an occupation, you're reducing the like whatever revolutionary possibility of an occupation. So yeah, just to stress it really strongly, is an occupation is not a symbolic protest, and shouldn't be a symbolic protest. I don't think it's about experimenting with new forms of life and experimenting with these possibilities that exist when you take space that is routinely denied to us by capitalism. Yeah, like what? Oh yeah, I mean, if you are familiar with the stories on it was what day was it? October? The first Wheeler Hall occupation at UC Berkeley, a number of students locked them inside Wheeler Hall, and a crowd of about like 3,000 about outside clashed with the police, like exchanging blows, and were eventually able to win the release of the people inside the building. At UC Santa Cruz, on the first day of school, students occupied the Graduate Student Commons and held it for a week, which is right in the center quad of campus. And in addition to that, students at UC Santa Cruz on the week of November 18th and 19th occupied first the Kresge Town Hall, which is an auditorium on campus with about 500 people, and then the following day congregated, held a general assembly, and decided they wanted to occupy the main administration building on campus, which is Kerr Hall. And Kerr Hall was occupied by students, locked down with barricades, and was held for about a week until the police broke it up. And during that time, students drank the chancellor's champagne, drank his coffee, ate his food, used their fancy equipment for techno parties, and generally had a good time. And we video conferenced with Austrian occupations. So this tactic of occupations is not something that came about in 2009, but it's something that has existed for a long time. But yeah, if you have any questions, I mean, you want?
Yeah. At UC Davis, there was a sit-in occupation in November when the fee hike of 32% was announced, and then there were 52 arrests that came from that, and several occupations afterwards to get the charges dropped for the one person, a friend of mine, was brutalized during that. She was slammed onto the ground and onto a cop car, and actually she's at university right now. And there was also some occupations of the library, like a weekend in the library that had to do with services at the library being cut and defunded. And we also had a march to the freeway on March 4th when UC Davis students tried to take over the freeway and were shot with pepper balls and such, and were not able to get onto the freeway. But it was a pretty amazing day. And then we actually had tent occupations. Like we had a thing called Tent City for a while, where we had tents set up on the quad where they're set up now as Occupy UC Davis. But this was before, like, the tent thing was a tactic that people were using in this way, as this like larger national thing. But we did have a Tent City, and we were there for a few days. We had gardens there, and we chatted with students in Puerto Rico who were also occupying their universities and striking and shut down their universities, and we talked to them, and they encouraged us to continue. So it really felt like a worldwide struggle, but sort of very based in the universities at the time. And I think a lot of us were starting to realize the limits of that towards the end of like 2010-ish, and we're looking for larger struggles to connect to. And then, so that's great.
So it's really important. Something that made these occupations different than a sit-in were the fact that students built barricades. So these barricades were the construction of how I mean it was these, yeah, it was a way for us to control the entrances and exits of the building, to stop cops and administrators from entering the building and controlling the flow of who gets in and who doesn't get in. And they were built in this After the Fall guide. There is a at the end of it, there's something called the Occupation Do-It-Yourself guide that describes how to technically build these barricades. The diagrams aren't included, and if you want to see the version that includes the diagrams of how to build the barricade, go to the invisiblecommittee.wordpress.com. The invisiblecommittee.wordpress.com has the pamphlet version, but basically they were built using truck ties and seat clamps, because most university buildings have these push bar doors, you know, and the seat clamp would hook on to the actual door, and you would take whatever you could find. At Kerr Hall, people used refrigerators, which the university got really pissed about because they're expensive, big photocopy machines. Anything that we could find that was large enough to be larger than the door, to stop the door from opening. And these barricades were good enough that for the police to come in at Kerr Hall, they had to call the fire department in to actually saw the doors off their hinges to get in, or break windows to get in. And lockdown occupations happened at Fullerton, SF State, Berkeley, and Santa Cruz. Yeah, lockdown occupations with barricades happened at UC Santa Cruz, SF State, UC Berkeley, and CSU Fullerton. So if there's any questions, I think we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, the point of the barricades, when you seize a building, is, I mean, obviously at some point it's possible that the police will be able to enter the building when they decide to, but the point is that they need to apply a certain level of violence to gain entry to the building, which means that they can't just decide to walk in and interrupt your activities anytime. Like, so basically, the key objectives is first, I mean, to make the doors on the buildings themselves impossible to open, and if you don't have control of the lock or the keys, and even the locking system on the doors themselves, like, can be subverted pretty easily. So to really reinforce the way that the doors themselves shut, so they need to smash a window or something like this, saw the door off the hinges, and then behind that to pile up as much material as possible: tables, yeah, fax machine, copy machine, refrigerators, yeah, lots of chairs, like hundreds and hundreds of chairs, and tie everything together with like 200-pound zip ties, truck ties, and then also use 2x4s to brace all of the interior doors, which provide access to the corridors which lead to the exterior doors. And the point is that this it requires the administration to mobilize like the entirety of their police force, call in the fire department, so that when they decide to evict the occupation, they have to expend all of their potential resources. It causes a scene that brings all of the students out, like all out to see what the hell's going on. There's probably gonna be a big confrontation as well. It obviously makes some bad media for them when they like have to destroy their own building to take out the students which are occupying their own building. But the main thing is just that it buys you a certain amount of time, like in some cases like as much as a week, before they decide to take this kind of action. Like they try to maybe find ways to negotiate you out or something, which is not really gonna work. But
and the point, as opposed to symbolic occupations, is really not to get arrested. I mean, people do get arrested, but whenever people were given the opportunity to leave, people left. Like if they knew they were cornered, people left, mostly, sort of. I mean, of course, some people decide to be symbolically arrested, or we're not symbolically arrested and we're just snatched up by the pigs. But I think for the most part, the idea is to be strategic about arrests and not to go into a situation already assuming that you're going to get arrested. I mean, people definitely got arrested. I got arrested a whole bunch of times, and I actually I got suspended from school. Oh yeah, I mean, in an instant where a barricade wasn't used was Wheeler Hall, the second occupation of Wheeler Hall, and because there were no barricades, the police were able to just saunter in and wake up everyone at 5:30 in the morning and arrest hundreds of people. So I think that's, and people were taken to Santa Rita without their clothes. I mean, so yeah, I think that's it. Cool. Any questions?